Many years ago, I released a video discussing what little we knew about Carol Holiday at the time of Deltarune Chapter 2's release. Since then, we've finally gotten to see her on screen, gotten confirmation of her name, and have a clearer picture of who she is as a person. So, with Chapter 5 set to release next year, now seems like the perfect time to look at all the pieces of characterization we currently have regarding Carol and see not only how my early interpretation holds up, but also what new insights we can take from these chapters. When I made my first Carol video, I raised some questions regarding whether or not she might be abusive or otherwise controlling to Noelle, or, at minimum, extremely intimidating. I made these assumptions based on Noelle's fears of asking her mother for the house key, Rudy's concerns about how cold she is to her daughter, the ominous eviction notice in Asgore's house and shop, as well as the way the NPCs describe her as ice-cold, lacking charisma, and being so tough on crime that the police are merely eye candy. The Spamton sweepstakes further painted a concerning picture with how Noelle would try not to be too loud when playing video games at night, lest Carol come in and unplug the TV. At the time, I did consider how Des's disappearance may have led to Carol growing colder and more controlling, but on the whole, I had many red flags regarding her character that the new chapters only validated. And it's interesting because at the time, some of my commenters believed that Toby wouldn't write an abusive or otherwise toxic mother. Yet in the aftermath of Chapter 4, not only is it generally agreed that Carol is at least emotionally abusive or neglectful to Noelle, but some take it to the extreme of her being entirely evil. But I believe there are more interesting ways to analyze this character than simply painting in shades of black and white, and perhaps this extreme has been taken just a bit too far. I think we can all agree that her one on-screen appearance left an extremely strong impression. Not only was Noelle terrified to see her, but Carol's theme music was more like icy ambiance than anything melodic. She ordered Susie to return the guitar, demanded Noelle to go into the kitchen, and refused to hear her daughter out when she tried to explain the situation. Worse, she told Susie to stay away from her daughter, period. Susie obviously refused to comply, but the hostility Carol directed at Susie stands in strong contrast to how cordially she acts toward Kris, or the soul we use to control them. In this brief scene, we see a no-nonsense woman who is furious to see her missing daughter's guitar in the hands of a rebellious punk that's captured Noelle's heart. Some have taken this as homophobia. Personally, I think the more likely answer can be found in Rudy's Chapter 4 Weird Route dialogue. There he says, "Carol, damn. I keep telling her to keep a key at City Hall, but she insists on keeping everything important at home. Like when Noelle was a kid. She made her paper snowflakes for Carol to hang up at work, but Carol just wouldn't take them there, because she wanted to keep the damn things safe. She preserved them and stuck them up on the wall at home." Preservation holds great meaning to Carol, not only with the bronze snowflakes, but also in the way that Des's room remains undisturbed and no one is permitted inside. Now consider that Des was known to be very rebellious, with a love of scary movies, heavy metal, and even promised to take Noelle somewhere far away, like the Cyber City. And consider that Des's room also contains more feminine instruments like flutes and violins that are dented, and note that Des carried around a wiffle bat, the rollerblades, the paintball gear, the army rations, and the pot. All of these attributes not only clash with Carol's poised, proper, and pristine holiday image, but they also align quite closely with Susie. Regardless of what became of Des, she is now missing. Most people do not talk about her. The Holiday Mansion remains bright and festive both inside and out, with the exception of Des's room and the basement's dark atmosphere. It's possible that Carol despises Susie so much specifically because she reminds her of Des, her missing daughter, and whether that's compounded by the fact that Des was rebellious and potentially had friction with Carol prior to her mysterious fate, there's no denying that Des left a grave wound. There's a deeper layer to this too. With Carol valuing preservation so much, removing the guitar from Des's room may as well be an insult to Des herself. How dare Susie come in, take one of the few mementos she has of Des, and play it? How dare Noelle allow or even encourage this? Doesn't Noelle care about her sister's memory? Doesn't she know that guests aren't allowed in there? Note how in the Tenna flashback in Chapter 3, Carol leaves right after Des. We don't know a lot about what Carol was like beforehand, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Des incident led to Carol becoming colder and much more controlling. It would explain why she has such an iron grip on the town, to the point where the police are mostly a formality. Carol is described as lacking charisma, but working hard and having such a good track record that no one dares oppose her in local elections. It's possible that she's held this position since before the Holiday and the Dreamer families fell apart. We have no reason to believe otherwise, but I do wonder if the loss of Des only made her more controlling of the town. After all, Noelle's wallpaper shows pictures of the family together in the snow, dressing festive and having good times. Carol used to party with the Dreamers in their college days. There was something about her that appealed to Rudy that's surely deeper than her appearance, and she clearly sees something in the more fun-loving and laid-back Rudy, too. So while it's possible that Carol was always serious and stern, the loss of Des likely brought her worst attributes to the forefront. Then there's Susie's reputation as the school bully and delinquent. Rumors perpetuate throughout the school over the smallest misunderstandings. See what happened when Susie interrupted Snowy and Monster Kid's ballgame. No one besides Kris and Toriel have really given Susie a fair chance besides Noelle. So if Carol has heard of Susie, it's likely her worst attributes at the forefront. Not exactly the kind of person she would want around Noelle. Remember, this is someone who canceled school to keep her daughter from going out on a rainy day. I think that speaks to how protective Carol is of her one remaining daughter. It's just that, in being so protective, she fails to see how much she's hurting the one child she has left. But that's not to say there are no positive elements of Carol in her one on-screen appearance. In Chapter 1, she had given Asgore an eviction notice, yet in Chapter 4 we learned that she's not only been hiring Asgore to work around the house, but she's bought out many of his flowers to decorate the festival. Toriel notes that she's been helping Asgore, and is mostly grateful for this, save her encouraging his you-know-what. Whether or not this is his investigations, likely regarding deaths, or trying to get back with Toriel remains unclear, but when the two do interact in Chapter 4, she's aloof but not cruel to him, letting him take the snack tray outside. Asgore also states that she's kind, and while Asgore's judgment may not be entirely reliable, she clearly cares enough to help him get by despite her earlier warning. Perhaps the warning was less of a threat and more of a reminder that he needs to properly run a business, and her buying out his flowers for the festival was her way to further nudge things along. I think there's something deeper we can glean from this aspect of the scene as well. Considering Asgore's desires to expose the truth to Toriel and the rest of the town, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Asgore and Carol had bonded over their shared grief and loss despite Asgore losing his position as police chief. Now, a more cynical reading might suggest that Carol is using Asgore's own guilt to have him do busy work for her and is fueling his own conspiracy chasing. There are strong hints that she's leveraging Kris's own promise and guilt, and with her controlling tendencies it wouldn't be out of the question. That being said, I'm not entirely sure if this is out of malice. Carol's tendency to preserve the past, to cling to the happy image of a bright, festive family, aligns with Asgore's own desire to fix his family and bring it back to normal. The Holiday family is in shambles. Not only is Jess gone, but Rudy is deathly ill and may not survive. Those Christmases spent at the Dreamer house are now a distant memory. I believe both Carol and Asgore crave a return to that idyllic past. They cannot accept change, and they cannot accept the present. Even Kris struggles with change, given how poorly they take Sans' presence at the end of Chapter 4, to say nothing of their loneliness brought on by Asriel's departure. The difference is that Carol is much more outwardly cold and controlling. Nor is this clearer than her relationship with Noelle. It's rather telling that Noelle's first mention of her mother is how scared she is to ask for a house key. In my previous video, I also noted the common observation that Noelle's arc with Queen could, in a way, parallel Noelle's relationship with her mother. When viewed through that lens, with Queen wanting Noelle to be a perfectly compliant peon but also craving her happiness, I think we can gain a better understanding of Carol's possible perspective. She may believe that by restricting Noelle and manufacturing the perfect life and image for her, she's guaranteeing Noelle's success and happiness. We know that Noelle runs cross-country, sings in the church choir, has high grades, and certainly isn't left wanting in terms of material possessions. She has a flat-screen TV, video games, a computer, a nicely furnished room, but Noelle is afraid to try wearing goth makeup because she's unsure her mother would allow it. She only watched scary movies with Des when her parents were asleep. When she did the Evil Rat and Dragon Blazers, she did so in secret so that her parents wouldn't take the game away. Rudy believes that Noelle is easily frightened, and to an extent that still holds true with her initial reactions to things like mice in Chapter 2, but it shows just how much Noelle hides from her parents to fit into the image of a perfect Christmas angel. Carol is clearly proud of Noelle, or she wouldn't bronze the paper snowflakes. But Carol is also very distant. She spends most of her time at work. She didn't attend the church service when her sickly husband did, thereby failing to watch her daughter sing. Carol sits in an unusual place of being cold, hard on Noelle, but also distant. Noelle clearly finds discomfort in this, as she laments to Rudy how much she wishes he'd come home so it wouldn't just be her and her mother. Her apprehension about inviting Susie over also suggests that Carol has been somewhat outspoken about Susie in the past, considering that Caddy didn't seem to have this same problem despite her own goth aesthetic and occult interests. As mentioned above, I think there's something deeper, because while Caddy is goth, she's also quiet and subdued compared to Susie's brash, outspoken, and aggressive attitude. Moreover, Caddy works at the diner, doesn't have the reputation of a school bully, and her interest in the occult is more quirky than it is dangerous, as far as we know. In contrast, Susie is brash, loud, messy, and cannot be controlled, while Carol craves control. Some might argue that this aspect of her character probably did exist even in Noelle's early childhood, with how Noelle described the Ferris wheel ride with Kris as forced. A more charitable read is that Carol, and/or Toriel, encouraged the ride because the two were friends and friends should hang out together. Maybe it was meant to be for Kris's benefit, with them being a chaotic gremlin who wasn't great at socializing. Noelle may have even said it was forced to make it clear that she didn't have romantic feelings for Kris. Still, the more dubious readings are worth some consideration with how little we know about Carol at this time. She's happy to hear that Noelle wants to go to the festival with Kris at the end of the Chapter 4 Weird route, in stark contrast to how harshly she treats Susie in the normal route. It's interesting, too, because Kris has always been an odd kid with an interest in morbid pranks and mischief, yet Carol is perfectly fine with him spending time in her home. Kris has known the family since they were small, and for all their eccentricities is someone Carol knows, who has an established connection with her daughter. But then, Kris is also easier to control, aren't they? And with the fixation with red, heart-shaped objects, it's entirely possible that Carol had a hand in orchestrating their current situation. For all we know, she could be the second voice in the Goner Maker, but that's still a bit of a stretch right now. We don't know a lot about Carol's relationship to the town religion, as the Christmas she uses to define her family's identity is decidedly separate from the Deltarune prophecy and the faith surrounding it. Noelle played the angel in a pageant, so it's possible that Carol does follow the religion, and if she follows the religion, it's possible that she's familiar with the prophecy. Some of the oddities with Noelle and Kris start to fall into place if we look at Carol's controlling tendencies toward her daughter, not only as a grieving response to what became of Des, but also perhaps a desire to make Noelle the girl of the prophecy, and thus something much greater. Noelle equips ribbons. Love finds its way to the girl. Forced Ferris wheel rides. A simple, predictable relationship between two childhood friends and neighbors. Not at all like her daughter getting with the town troublemaker on the verge of expulsion, who nearly everyone disregards besides Kris and Toriel. Obviously, going this far is entirely speculative, but Nighthawk mentioned in their own Noelle video how the Holiday family has this veneer of being this perfect, happy family forever frozen in Christmas cheer, despite their missing daughter, despite Rudy's illness, and despite the distance between Carol and Noelle. And despite how cold and commanding Carol is to Noelle, to the point where Noelle stammers, apologizes, and begs Susie to leave. Carol ordering Noelle to the kitchen for a firm reprimanding reeks of a parent who talks over their child and thinks they know best, disregarding the feelings of their kids. Sometimes a controlling parent acts so controlling due to them projecting their own problems onto their family. Sometimes it's about their own social status and image. I could see both applying to Carol, though we'll have to see where the next chapter goes, since Susie made her intentions quite clear in the main route, which undoubtedly won't bode well for Noelle when Carol clearly does not take rebellion well. We honestly don't have much to go off of with Carol and Des's relationship, other than the fact that regardless of how rebellious Des was in the past, Carol still saw fit to preserve her room. It's sacred ground in the Holiday House. No one goes in. No one touches the guitar. The guitar with the shelter code. The shelter code that is a December holiday. Now, was the code made in honor of Des? If so, what does this say about their relationship? Des could have been the golden child, and at minimum, Carol did permit her punkish interests enough for her to not only decorate her room according to her interests, but also for her to color her door black, thereby clashing with the rest of the house. I think this is striking, because the state of the Holiday Mansion seems very deliberate. The exterior and interior both reek of Christmas cheer. Everything is clean, tidy, and perfectly organized. The doors all match except for December's. But as previously stated, Des wanted to take Noelle somewhere far away, with dazzling lights. She and Noelle watched those scary movies in secret. I almost wonder if Rudy pushed for Des's independence and respect for her interests, since he's very overtly supportive of Noelle and Susie, engages in video games with Noelle, and overall has more laid-back and positive attitude that he admits balances Carol out. I'm of two minds. Either Carol was less uptight in the past, or she begrudgingly allowed Des to express herself while being much more coddling of Noelle. I still find the more proper instruments in the bedroom a bit suspect, since nothing we know about Des suggests she'd be the sort to willingly play the flute when she could shred on a guitar. That being said, it does at least show that Des was loved, and perhaps at the time Carol may have failed to understand her daughter but still tried to encourage her to be herself and connect with her to the best of her ability. There's something else too, the shelter. Carol is clearly involved with it, and has been for a very long time. Given how Kris reacts to the shelter, it really does strike me as something traumatic to them, and the 1225 Secret Room in Chapter 3 further ties Kris to the mysterious circumstances of Des's disappearance. We know very little about the shelter, but Alfie wonders if what's inside isn't more dangerous than it appears, and we know that it harbors a dark world. The kids all used to explore the woods, and based on everything we know about Des, she strikes me as someone who'd be suspicious of her mom's big secret operation. Then there's the rain, which not only caused Carol to close school for Noelle once, but also shut down nearly all the businesses in Hometown in Chapter 4. There's a lot of water imagery in Deltarune, and that imagery ties it directly to darkness. While the precise circumstances of Des's disappearance remain unclear, it would not surprise me if it happened on a rainy or snowy night. Not to mention, there's the Fallen Star book that mentions tears that look like glass. Tears from a star that's in the sky. Rain and tears evoke strikingly similar imagery, and rain plays a significant role in the light world atmosphere of Chapter 4, effectively leading the heroes to the church to begin with. If Des did disappear during the rain, then rain might carry a significant weight for Carol, thereby justifying the town almost entirely shutting down. It would explain why she wouldn't want Noelle out during the rain. If she lost one daughter during a storm, what if she lost the other? It's absurd. She can't control the weather. It's going to rain whether she likes it or not. But if it's a response to grief, then it makes some degree of sense. Grief is hardly rational. Hell, this might also explain why Carol herself was tougher on crime than the police. If the cops couldn't save her daughter, how can they be trusted to keep Noelle safe? What are they truly good for? Undyne is aware of the shelter to a certain extent, which she may have inherited from Asgore, but I doubt she fully comprehends the town's dark secrets, given the way she laughs off the notion of dark worlds when you make Kris warn her about them. As Alfie says, she might as well be eye candy. She certainly isn't good at her job, given the way she treats the traffic jam. It does create a curious contradiction, though. Asgore lost his job, likely after Des's disappearance, yet Carol and Asgore still work together. Part of me wonders if perhaps his firing was necessary to save face, while she enlisted him in secret to continue the search for Des. All we know is that he tried to protect them, and no one believes what he saw or experienced, besides presumably Carol. But that may make Asgore a vital lead in finding and/or saving her daughter. And then, of course, there's Kris. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Kris is being emotionally manipulated on a certain level, nor do I think it's a stretch to say that Kris was there for the moment that Des disappeared. Carol welcomes Kris into her house. Given the phone caller says, "I'll be right there," before Carol arrives, it's rather likely that she is the person on the phone, or at least one of them if you believe the red text is a separate speaker. From this, we can gather a few things. 1. Carol has a grand plan, and Kris is pivotal to that plan, as well as their soul. This ties in with the red heart iconography, and Noelle mentioning that Carol really likes red heart-shaped objects. For one reason or another, Carol is aware of us, welcomes us, and sees us as pivotal to some greater agenda, whether or not she is the Roaring Knight herself. Additionally, this means she must know about dark worlds, as well as the prophecy, most likely. A lot of people believe the Knight is Des. Some believe the Knight is Carol, and some believe it's Rudy. I do not, because I feel as though his illness is debilitating enough that even going to church wore him out tremendously, and I cannot imagine him running through town with Undyne to the shelter. The alternative is that he faked his illness, and I do not like that interpretation for how it undermines the tragedy of his condition, and how it further cements the fractured nature of the holidays. I do, however, think there is a case to be made for Carol Knight, if only for what it might mean narratively and thematically. If we assume Carol is the Knight, then we can read the Knight's action as a desperate attempt to claw her way back to her daughter, no matter the cost. The fierce, unstable appearance of the Knight could reflect her emotional state beyond her cold, composed mask. She fights with a katana, and the Knight has a sword. Carol's room even has a black sword in it, though it's obscured by Asgore in the cutscene. She's such a trusted figure in town that it makes sense that Susie wouldn't immediately consider her a suspect, no matter how cruel she was in their one on-screen interaction. It's a reading that works, with the main argument against it being how quickly she gets from the Holiday Mansion to the church. Ignoring that Susie is able to run from the Dreamer house to the school, or from the Castle Town to Mettaton's house within seconds. That's not to say that I am solely a Carol Knight enthusiast. I am firmly 50-50 on Carol or Des, as I think there are interpretations for the latter that are compelling in their own way. My main reservation is that what Des Knight does to Carol's motivation, if Des isn't truly missing. So, what does this have to do with Kris? Well, again, I believe that Kris was there when tragedy struck, and I also believe that Kris feels responsible for it. They're clearly traumatized, and the Chapter 4 Egrim shows that they not only had art therapy, but are repressing memories of what they saw behind the tree. The tree itself might be metaphorical, a mask for some greater truth. Kris undoubtedly wants to bring Des back. Their goals align with Carol to that end. The specifics vary depending on which of the two is the Knight. Namely, if Carol is the Knight, then their more dubious loyalties are squarely aligned with Carol, and Carol is the primary person pulling their strings besides us. If Des is the Knight, it's a bit more complicated, depending on how Des became the Knight and how much she's changed. If, for instance, she disappeared in the darkness for a very long time and only emerged recently, then it's possible that Kris began work with Carol first. Yet we know that, if nothing else, Chapter 3's Dark World was premeditated in order to lure in and capture Undyne, which begs the question of what Des would want Undyne for. At this time, we genuinely don't know, and even police sacrifice next week may not be the full message from the phone call. Carol at least has an established tension with the police, though regardless, the fact that Undyne possessed one of the shelter codes is rather significant regardless of who's behind that dark helmet. Really, the biggest difference the knight's identity brings is whether or not the goal is to literally find Des or to save her from her current state, as the knight. That is, unless Carol is fully on board with what her daughter has become and what her daughter has planned, but we know too little to draw concrete conclusions. What we do know is that Kris has obligations to Carol. They made a promise. Carol does not want Susie near the guitar, nor does she want Susie to know the code, and despite Kris's closeness to Susie, they are willing to intervene to appease Carol. Does Carol truly value Kris, or does she value the soul they carry? I think that's a question that we'll explore in future chapters, because right now all we have to go off of is a few limited interactions. That being said, there's the aforementioned family history and connection to her daughter that makes Kris a trustworthy co-conspirator, and their humanity may also make them the only option, given the human soul and parts aspect of the prophecy. In such a case, while Carol may value us, an alternative reading is that she trusts Kris to keep us in control, just as much as she sees us useful to her plan. If we go with second voice Carol theory, it might even explain why she intervened and put us in Kris, because a vessel of our creation is much harder to control. Either way, she's happy about Kris and Noelle at the end of the Weird Route in Chapter 4, but is that happiness purely out of ignorance? I have trouble believing Carol would be okay with what we put Noelle through in the Weird Route unless it was in the interest of making Noelle stronger, and even that I have trouble believing. Carol may be a deeply flawed parent, but right now I think her being outright evil is still a big stretch, which brings an additional tension regarding Kris's situation. Carol could care about and value Kris still, but given how deeply Des's absence has impacted her, I do think that if Kris blames himself, she may also blame them to an extent as well. Not enough to cut ties with them, but certainly enough to pressure them with a plan, a duty to atone, a promise that they made that leaves them torn between their new friendship with Susie and their old obligations. Carol is an adult with a lot of power in their dynamic, not only being the town mayor, but also Noelle and Des's mother, a victim of tragedy, a tragedy that haunts Kris to this day. Yet, is it also not Carol's fault? If the shelter is the root of Des's disappearance and Kris's trauma, and Carol has authority over the shelter, then this means that she's known what's inside of it, and thus may have orchestrated the source of Des's disappearance herself. This adds a further element of tragedy to her and Kris's relationship. Both are at fault. Both want to fix things and miss the good old days. That may be why they're working together, beyond an element of guilt or emotional manipulation. If that's the case, one could view their alliance as one born of solidarity. That may be the best-case scenario, but it doesn't excuse the more dubious elements or Carol's inherent authority over Kris. I think Chapter 5 will give us a chance to better understand Carol's dynamic with Kris and better allow us to fill in the blanks. The setup is there, and it's deeply concerning, but for now, we lack enough pieces to complete the puzzle. I think at the core of Carol Holiday lies a fundamental instability due to her circumstances. Though she maintains a facade of calm, cold control, we mustn't forget that her husband is deathly ill, she's already lost one daughter, and depending on who the knight is, said daughter may be irreparably changed. Now, her only remaining daughter has eyes for the town rebel. I am very curious to see how she handles Chapter 5 in the main route, given Susie outright stated her plans to take Noelle to the festival. Will Carol honor her daughter's wishes, or will she intervene? Will we get to see her during the festival, or will she mostly remain behind the scenes? And how will she factor into the chapter's dark world, if at all? If I were to describe Carol's Chapter 4 appearance as anything, it'd be a hook. A tease. Clearly it's enough to have generated heaps of discussion, speculation, and discourse, which makes me all the more excited to find out more. What was she like before versus now? Will Toby frame her in a more sympathetic light as we uncover the truth behind the tragedy? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Obviously, with so little screen time so far, there's room for many different readings and interpretations, and I'll likely do another follow-up video once we get more Carol screen time. In the meantime, I've got a few big projects I want to aim for in 2026, namely the Akechi Deep Dive Analysis and the Meta-Narratives and Gaming video. Both are still in a very early state of scripting and outlining, but if you would like to stay up to date on these projects, you can do so over on my Patreon, along with years of other perks. I'm also currently thinking of revising the current tiers and expanding them, and have a public post up for that as well. I'll be streaming more Pokemon Legends ZA in the future, as well as resuming in Stars in Time, Pokemon Scarlet, and Persona 5 Strikers once I finish ZA. If you want to keep up to date, you can find a link to my Twitch in the description and on the end screen. And if you can, please do leave a comment, a like, or hype the video if you are able, as it absolutely helps the channel. I'm not entirely sure what the holiday season holds, but I wish you all a happy December, and I'll see you next time.